My name is Grant Cooper. I'm a cinematographer, originally from Calgary, Alberta, now based in Toronto, Ontario. I was initially approached by my friend and collaborator, Sarah Alfaro. She's the director and writer of this, as well as Colin Walker is the producer. We've collaborated on several projects now and we really click. She always is pushing things and is open to just trying anything and really is bold in her decision making. So I knew that she wanted to go in a direction that was going to be very bold and playful. This was a spot for a skateboard and coffee shop called Brockton Haunt. You know, skateboarding as itself is very, how do I say this without sounding cheesy? I mean, skateboarding for me is very nostalgic. I've been skateboarding for a long time, so I always think of it as very youthful, very playful. It's mostly about fun. Skateboarding to me, and I think a lot of the skateboarding community, is about having fun. So we wanted that represented in the visuals, we wanted that represented in the story, how the story is told. And when Sarah brought me on, the treatment had this quite ambitious storyline, this narrative, where our lead character, Sam, is retelling their story about something weird having happened to them. They were at the library and they heard a thump, and then the next thing you know, they're being transported through all these different locations. And throughout all these different locations that they're being transported to, somebody is always kind of yelling, "Meet me at the haunt, meet me at the haunt." Visually, we were just going for something that was really bold, very colorful, a little on the higher key side than I normally do, while still having one scene that has a little bit more low key. We wanted the movement to be very fluid, like constantly in motion, constantly floating. So we chose to pretty much have the camera live on a gimbal the entire time and just kind of feel like you're skateboarding, as if you're like carving through a park and you're just floating. That's what Sarah really wanted, it to just be this never-ending float, essentially, until you kind of hit that last moment of the story and they're just static. You kind of start static and controlled and you end static and controlled, and the whole rest is just like this floating journey. So for this project, we knew that we were going to be shooting, often in harsh daylight, and we had a strong team, small and mighty, but I'm not throwing up fly swatters on condors or anything like that, so we can't control things entirely. We don't have all the time and money in the world, so you kind of got to lean into it a little bit. And I think both Sarah and I really love editorial, fashion photography, that kind of more front lit, a little bit higher key stuff. So we tend to lean into that when we have to do these sort of shoots, but it also really fit the story. So during pre-production with Colin and Sarah, Sarah kept bringing up that she wanted a snorri cam, and Colin was apprehensive, and as I understand, because the snorri cam can be a difficult thing to pull off on the day, just in terms of how is the actor going to be with it, how are they going to perform with something like that on their body. If you don't have someone who's rigged that up, it can be a little tedious. So he was a little apprehensive. I was like, maybe there's something else. And the more we talked about it, the more we realized we didn't necessarily want the camera to be locked to the person so much as we wanted the person to be floating through a locked environment. So that led us more towards the Spike Lee look of having a person on a dolly, but we knew we couldn't lay track. We'd see the track. We didn't have budget to paint that out. I was thinking, how could I kind of get the best of all these worlds, to have this combined unit that had our talent, our camera, lighting, and power all together. And talking with Timur and Vitaly, we kind of came up with this solution where we had a doorway dolly with a bazooka post, with a vibration isolator, with the gimbal mounted on there with the mini LF. And then additionally, we wanted a light on there because, again, a lot of the time I'm shooting towards the sun to have a hard backlight. And so we threw a 600D with a 2K putt-putt right on the doorway dolly. And honestly, it worked pretty great. My cinematography style, I like to think of it as very adaptive. I don't like to be too heavy-handed and have something that shows on every single project. However, I do get the feedback like, oh, I can tell you shot that. So I know there's a certain inherent way I compose or way I move the camera or the way I light that does translate from project to project. But I do like to look at it as story first and then creating rules and sort of getting inspired from the page and figuring out how to implement certain, what lenses I'm choosing, how are we lighting this, how are we moving the camera. All that to me comes from the characters, comes from the story, as opposed to like what my taste is. So adaptive and story first, always about intention, always about motivation. That I think is what boils down to my inherent style. For this project, we wanted like a larger than life feel. There was a lot of POV shots and that sort of like immersive perspective. So when we're using 18mm full frame open gate on a mini LF, you feel it, like you're in it, right? Shooting full frame was one of the first things we thought about doing. We wanted to shoot on glass that was really flattering on faces because we wanted a lot of shots of faces, especially close-up wide angles. So we shot on the RE Signature Primes, which are gorgeous lenses, very pretty, still with a lot of character though. In terms of lighting, we really thought, okay, we can only really control certain situations, like we're shooting in the library, so we were able to control that situation. Kind of did a day for dusk feel in there because we knew that the rest of the story is going to be daylight. And then there's certain scenes where we had a little more control, the shots are a little tighter, so we were able to control those. But then there were other scenes that were just wide open, high noon, wide open, or maybe a little bit later I delayed some things and got afternoon light. But we just used bounce boards, and like went handheld and did what we could. Teamer, Vitaly, and Zach were helpful in just, throwing up an Opal 4x when the sun was too harsh and direct on our talent. We can get tight enough to control that. Or building, a 4x or 8x bounce that we could bring in and really like fill in the fill side and make that contrast ratio a little bit smaller. In the library, we kind of played off the tungsten fixtures that were in the ceiling. We controlled a lot of that ambient by turning most of them off, but just leaving little hits here and there. And then going off that tungsten light, we're motivating our tungsten key on our talent Spencer. So we had a 600D with an Octobox Light Dome Mark II, which we put the grid on for the wide so it wouldn't spill all over the place. We put full CTO, maybe full and a quarter, which was perfect. You just wanted to make our talent pop a little bit and separate them from the tungsten house lights. So creating color contrast through, you have your ambient daylight, your 2700 key, which is what I was rating the camera at, and then you had your 3200-ish house lights. When we went to some of these POV shots of the book, when we were at Spencer's POV, we wanted to kind of start to get away from it feeling realistic and a little bit starting to lean into the transition that's about to come that's a little more surreal. So we had the spotlight mount for the 600D, used that to really create a spotlight on that book. We motivated off that for our transition so that that blue light of the spotlight was going to hit back on Spencer. When we did the reverse, looking up at Spencer POV from the book's perspective, it was just a white wall or white ceiling. So I was like, that looks horrible. But in the initial wide, you could kind of see in the ceiling some of the reflection from the tubes going through some of just there were these weird white tubes in the background. It was creating shadows on the ceiling. And I was like, well, I could just lean into that and just create sort of a pattern on the ceiling. It's already established in the wide. So we threw up a cookie spotlight, created a bit of a dreamy background that at least didn't look like a white wall. It was nice that we started in the library and we had a little bit of shade, but then I had to be on a gimbal on an easy rig, mini LF fully built on rollerblades for all afternoon, so about 5 hours or something like that. In high noon to afternoon, no cloud coverage. But I had a blast. Everyone was kind of staring at me at the skate park because I'm this monstrosity skating around this giant camera and on rollerblades. I made sure that everyone at the park knew I could skateboard first, so I rolled in there with my skateboard for about half an hour during lunch just to ease everyone's suspicion. And our day was, you know, had some challenges. There was a lot of people just flying around, a lot of kids on scooters not paying attention, a lot of skateboarders just trying to do what they're there to do, which is just get their tricks. And we were trying to be cautious of that. We didn't want to get in the way. What was the question?
No, that's good.
Yeah, so in terms of anxiety with the rollerblades and the gimbal and the Mini LF and the signature primes, and I mean, in retrospect, yes, but honestly, I really try not to think about it. I actually don't think about it. When I'm on set, I'm in such work mode, sometimes to the benefit, sometimes to a fault. But yeah, that stuff doesn't creep in too much. I try to just be overly confident. I'm really playful on set. I like to joke around, and I like to keep the mood really light, especially when it is something like that, because as soon as you start to think, oh, something might go wrong or whatever, it usually does. And now that's not to say I'm being unsafe or I'm being careless. I'm just trying to be confident and know that I can rely on my skill set. However, with that said, I have my limitations. I am just a human. I get tired. And by the end of the day, I was starting to feel it, and it was starting to get to a point where it might have been, you know, a little sketchy. I think on the very last shot, I had a close call, and then we called it. But I'd been going for like, you know, 5-6 hours at that point, so it was time. That was probably the only time I started getting anxious, but I think I was almost too delirious to be anxious at that point. By using the gimbal and the rollerblades, I could match the speed of our talent as well as the head tilt, where I kind of really lock on and I parallax around as we're passing by. And it just worked perfectly. We got all these POV shots and these perspective shots that was really important for Sarah to kind of really have that immersive feel. So being on rollerblades, using the gimbal, having that freedom to move around really allowed me to hit what Sarah's vision was. Thanks to Ontario Camera for having me out on this segment, and thanks for supporting the project, and I hope all of you out there learn something.
So, remind me again, what happened?
Okay, so I was at the library minding my own business when I heard a loud, and there I found an ominous note. Whoa.
Whoa.
Then I was in Ashbridges skating around when I heard
Meet at the haunt.
From then on, signs were everywhere.
Meet me at the haunt!
Notes were hidden in plain sight. Everywhere I went, I just couldn't escape it.
The haunt! The haunt!
All signs led to one thing.
So what did you do?
You're looking at it.
Oh my god, did I tell you I did a sick kickflip right in front of the sirens?
Now I know you're making stuff up.